when the original seminar was canceled, I made some calls, looked at this as a real opportunity, because I love doing these. I love speaking on these issues, and I don't know how many of you all don't know me, but I exclusively practice drunk driving defense, or at least that's what I tell everybody. Lately I've been picking up some felony cases and some forfeiture and some FOIA cases and that sort of stuff, but for years I've done nothing but drunk driving and drug driving. If you would, Google plus me or follow me on Facebook. I've got this up here. This PowerPoint presentation is uploaded to the website, and I wanted to note for y'all that it's a little bit more detailed than what I'm going to be actually talking about. There's a lot of stuff that I need to gloss over in order to fit it within the time. But so I violated all the PowerPoint rules by including lots and lots of text, okay? But that's so you can go online and take a look at it and use it as like notes or something like that. So drug recognition experts are here in Michigan. We are state number 48, 49, 50, somewhere in that realm in terms of adopting this program. It's been around for a long time with a lot of the other states. If you look out to Oregon and Washington State, there's a bunch of DRE cases that are out there. This is all ancient history for these other states. And they're brand new here, and we've got, gosh, I don't remember how many, but 30 or so DREs across the state of Michigan, most of them being state troopers, okay? These are the cream of the crop, supposedly, and they're trained to do extensive drug evaluations over and above what you're used to seeing out on the roadway. The other materials that I've included online for you to take a look at, there's a cheat sheet. It's not anything official, okay? The cheat sheet, though, is going to help you go through your drug categories and the signs and symptoms so you can effectively cross-examine one of these drug recognition experts, okay? And then there's also 3 or 4 cases in there that you should read. If you want to do something like a Daubert hearing or something like that, you've got to get all of these cases and read them all so you understand what the prior decisions have been. So I've given you the good cases, okay? They're both good and bad in terms of the outcome or the decision, but it's very extensive analysis. Now, I also need to give a shout out to Tony Corrado. Tony Corrado is a retired police officer from Atlanta, Georgia. He's testified for me on numerous occasions, and he and I teach the standardized field sobriety training course together. If you have not taken the standardized field sobriety training course, then you really need to, okay? That is the building blocks for all drunk driving defense. And if you're going to effectively cross-examine a police officer in a normal garden variety drunk driving, you need to have that behind you, okay? Now, I know that a lot of you have gone out there and seen these police officers who do the alphabet and, hey, count backwards for me and blah, blah, blah. And I know that there's no Michigan judges that are going to suppress these tests, okay? I've seen the reluctance from the bench. But those are not good tests. And taking the standardized field sobriety training course will enable you to understand why they're not good tests. Now, Tony has a website, www.duiexpertwitness.com. He is extremely helpful. If you need an expert witness, I encourage you to give him a call, okay? On a drunk driving case or a drug driving case, he's been qualified up here many times. I even had well, it's not exactly an unpublished opinion, more of a decision letter from the Court of Appeals that told the lower court, district court way up north, you shall accept Tony Corrado as an expert witness, okay? Now, there are other resources available to you out there in terms of these drug driving cases. First and foremost is the Physician's Desk Reference Book. This is authoritative because it appears directly in the DRE training materials. There's an entire chapter dedicated to the Physician's Desk Reference Book. You might not want to buy the official one that's for doctors, but you could purchase a less expensive one that's for nurses. It's available at any bookstore, and it's a paperback. There's also Basalt. If you ever cross-examine any of the toxicologists or quote-unquote forensic scientists from Lansing on a blood case, they will be referencing Basalt, disposition of toxic drugs and chemicals in man. That one runs you about $300 though. It's expensive, but it's very comprehensive. There's also, I wanted to mention the Darrow Criminal Defense Forum. Darrow Criminal Defense Forum was set up by me and Josh Blanchard. We had proposed the idea to CDAM. Both Josh and I are board members at the Criminal Defense Attorneys of Michigan, and we proposed this idea of forming a listserv that would be a membership benefit. And there was a little bit of foot dragging on that, and Josh and I, over a couple of drinks, decided that we just break on out and do it ourselves. And so that's what we've done, is we put together this Darrow Criminal Defense listserv. You can email either one of us and get onto it as long as you are not prosecuting cases. If you're prosecuting cases, you're not allowed on it, unfortunately. And also, www.owidefenselaw.com. That is one of my many, many web pages. This one is currently in the works, though, to have comprehensive materials that deal with these drug recognition experts and standardized field sobriety tests. In other words, all of the governmental studies are going to be on there. But if you visit it today, it's in horrible shape. All right, only half of the website, or half of the web page is actually up. I got a couple kids that are going to be working on it over the Christmas break, and hopefully by the new year, you'll be looking at something that you can easily reference that has all of the materials that we're talking about today and a whole bunch more. Incidentally, this is the standardized field sobriety training course that I was talking about earlier. This is the course that Tony and I teach together. Now, drunk driving versus drug driving. What is the issue here? Okay? This is directly a quote. Drug driving is a growing problem in the United States because there's no national standard to measure the level of drug impairment. Detecting drug-impaired drivers is not easy. Some states have drug per se laws that forbid any presence of a prohibited substance or drug in the driver's body while operating a vehicle. Most states also train enforcement officials to help them identify drug-impaired driving. The Governor's Highway Safety Association supports elevating drug driving to a national priority. Okay? Pat Barone and I were talking a few years ago, and he says, Mays, the future in DUI is not in alcohol. It's in drugs. And he's right. You are going to see a wave of these things, of these drug drivers. And I mean, people are not taking more drugs today than they were 10 years ago, but all of a sudden we've got this mysterious drug recognition expert and what we'll talk about in a moment, the ARIDE program. Now, you know all that we changed the drunk driving statute earlier this last summer here to include impairing substances. Ooh. This was not particularly innovative on behalf of the state legislature. Frankly, this has been adopted in several states, and it's problematic. North Carolina is one of the states that has an impairing substances. Now, the reason why we amended the statute is to include things like huffing. Okay, this is a great story because it's only a few days old. This is out in Livingston County. Driver crashes, admits to huffing. Michigan state troopers arrested a 24-year-old Clarkston man while checking him for injuries. The driver advised the troopers that he had passed out while traveling in the parking lot before he struck the curb in a fire hydrant. Down here at the bottom, troopers located 18 cans of compressed gas duster. This is the stuff you clean your computer keyboard off, and he's going to huff this stuff and drive around. Why? Normally, what they would have done in the past is do a reckless driving on something like that, but now with the new impairing substances, they can actually charge this guy with drunk driving. Under the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, a drug is any substance that, when taken into the human body, can impair the ability of the person to operate a motor vehicle safely. This definition excludes some substances that physicians consider to be drugs. This definition includes some substances that physicians don't think of as drugs. Huh? What? All right, well, let's go to Michigan. Maybe Michigan makes a little bit more sense. No. Michigan says that everything that a doctor considers to be a drug is a drug, and everything that we also want to consider to be an impairing substance is a drug. And many of the drugs that don't have any impairing effect on a person's ability to operate a motor vehicle, a person can still be charged with operating while intoxicated. I've included here a reference to the Board of Pharmacy. I know that this is next to impossible for people to find. You look onto the schedule that's contained in the statutory language and you're like, gosh, I know that this thing's a drug, but this list is only so long. The Board of Pharmacy has an extensive list of controlled substances that are contained in the administrative rules. And I got the site there for you. You can't find it, just look this PowerPoint thing up on the CAP seminar webpage. Now, don't we want certain people to take their drugs before driving? All right? Do we? I mean, the narcoleptic driver, do we want that person falling asleep? Doesn't the person put themselves at risk of being arrested by mere fact that they're taking their medication to keep them awake to make them a safe driver? And then we've got all these cancer patients, all right? Statistically, we've just got a bunch of people out there that do have cancer. They've always been there. And these people are simply managing their pain, okay? We talk about tolerance when we talk about drinking alcohol, but we also need to address tolerance when it comes to these drugs. This quote down here is from a toxicologist. He says, William, there are people driving around that have so much of morphine in their system that when we measure it, that is a fatal dose to most people. And in this particular person's instance, it's only barely managing their pain. Now, we've got to back up a little bit and talk about drunk driving just in general. There is a new National Highway Traffic Safety Administration manual. This one's from '06. It's the most recent edition until just a few weeks ago. A few weeks ago when they released the March edition from 2013. March didn't get released until November, which is curious. And what they've done is they've taken all the good stuff that's contained in this book here that's all, very written out verbosely and changed it all for pictures because they figure that police officers identify with pictures more easily than they do written words. The first chapter is extremely long and it's all about drugs. And this is stuff that's on par with what a DRE is learning. They use all sorts of fancy language and terms that a normal police officer is not going to understand, not going to be able to pronounce, and yet the opening chapter is all about this. It's curious. What they're trying to do is they're trying to break these officers into the idea of thinking about these things so that they'll go on to the ARIDE program and go on to the DRE program. These are just some statistics about accidents and whatnot that they tell police officers to really get them motivated. Get on out there and catch those drunks is what they tell them. And they're all lies, okay? These things are drafted up statistically errored, flawed methodologies. They ask people who are exiting a bar, hey, would you mind blowing into a breath test? A little PBT? Sure. The person then blows way over the legal limit because they're coming fresh out of the bar, and the cop says, now would you have driven tonight? Yes? Oh, all right, so that is where we get our statistics for. And these were people that were not driving, okay? These are people that were not driving. We also inflate our alcohol fatalities by making up a number called alcohol-related fatalities. And then we take those alcohol-related fatalities and multiply that even, all right? There is approximately 50 to 60 blood draws done in the state lab up at Michigan State Police that involve fatal accidents every year, all right? That means that there are 50 to 60 fatal motor vehicle accidents that involve drunk drivers. And I'll be the first to admit, that's too many, okay? But it is not the 300 or 400 that's claimed, that's attributed to Michigan every year by MAD and National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Unless, of course, in the average drunk driving case, 4 to 6 people are killed, I guess. But no, that's not the case because statistically we can look at that information and we know that the number one person that a drunk driver kills, statistically, is him or herself. The number 2 person killed by a drunk driver, statistically, is the passenger of the vehicle, who is usually drunker than the driver. That's why the driver was the one driving. You drive tonight, buddy. I had too many. All right, I think I can keep it between the lanes. What we see, though, is this trend, okay? Back in the 1960s, the American Medical Association was approached, and they said, what is a per se limit that we should have? What level should we pass as a matter of law that it is so high that no one should be driving at that level? And they said 0.15. At 0.15, statistically speaking, no one should be getting behind the wheel. And a few years later, they said, well, let's reduce that down to 0.10. Why? Why is a per se level? Why isn't it just left up to the jury as to whether or not this person is actually intoxicated? Because we've all seen people at 0.12 who are very drunk, and we have seen people at 0.12 who are not drunk at all. And then we start to debate over the accident rates from 0.10 to 0.08. And of course, they promised us that we were going to save all sorts of lives by lowering it to 0.08, and not one life was ever saved. What instead they did was they increased their coffers. They made more citizens guilty of drunk driving. And now they're talking about lowering it to 0.05. Earlier this last spring, the National Traffic Safety Board was recommending an 0.05 limit, and there was outrage by the media and the public at large. They said 0.08 is already low enough, gosh darn it, and it doesn't need to be going lower. And NTSB backed up and said, no, we were just kind of kidding there. And sure enough, just last month, the head of the NTSB came out and yet again recommended a 0.05. And New Zealand, just a couple weeks ago, passed their 0.5. So this is going on. They are trying to lower it even further at this point. And yet, back in 2002, the Canadian government was looking at reducing theirs to 0.5, and there was an extensive study done by a very conservative, anti-alcohol, anti-drunk driving group, and they looked at it and they said, no, this is going to be counterproductive, actually. And then, of course, we also enact super drunk, because back in the 60s, this was really drunk, or this was drunk. 0.15 was drunk. And we looked at the Grand Rapids study, which said that most fatal motor vehicle accidents occur at 0.17 or higher. And so we fast forward from the 60s on forward to this 08 level, and then we go back just a couple of years ago and say, no, you know what? We were really serious about that 0.17. Come on. People are not more drunk nowadays. The human body has not changed in these intervening decades. Now, briefly talking about the standardized field sobriety training course, and I apologize that I'm talking so fast, but I'm trying to get through a massive amount of materials here. Standardized field sobriety tests are horizontal gaze nystagmus, the walk and turn, and the one-leg stand. These are the only 3 validated tests. From 1977, there was a validation study taken by the Southern California Research Institute pursuant to a grant by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. These were developed from 1977 forward. In 77, they explored all sorts of various field sobriety tests that police officers were reportedly using from across the country. This included things like alphabet, finger count, finger to nose, etc. These things were statistically analyzed through extensive research. And it turns out, lo and behold, that some tests are not accurate at all. As a matter of fact, when we talk about accuracy, the 3 tests that have been validated actually themselves are quite flawed. We'll talk about that in a moment. Phase 1, though, of the DUI detection and standardized field sobriety training course is the vehicle in motion. There are 28 driving behaviors that are identified as impaired driving that would give an officer probable cause to stop a vehicle. Speeding, incidentally, is not one of them, okay? And I know that a lot of people have stops for speeding. It doesn't mean that the stop is unlawful, but it does mean that it's not statistically correlated with impairment. And of course, we've all got our weaving within the lane of traffic where you've got an officer. I've got one over in Livonia. Almost every case that he's had, he's a younger officer, has been a stop for weaving within the lane of traffic. And yet we've got this case law out there that says you can't just stop somebody willy-nilly for weaving momentarily in their lane of traffic. So you take this class, though, and you learn about these things. Phase 2 is the personal contact phase. This is the signs and symptoms that a person may have been drinking. Police officers are trained to go through this systematically. What do the eyes, the ears, and the nose detect, all right? Do you see disheveled appearance? Do you see open containers? Do you hear inconsistent responses? Do you smell the odor of an intoxicant or the odor of an alcoholic beverage? All of these things make their way into the police reports in a systematic way. And that systematic way allows you as a defense attorney to effectively cross-examine because you start off on an objective plane that we can at least agree on this, right? And go from there. The tests, I'm going to have to just skip over them. But the walk and turn is supposedly 68% accurate, one leg stand 65% accurate, horizontal gaze nystagmus 77% accurate. If you look at the more recent studies, Marceline Burns is one of the main researchers at Southern California Research Institute. She's got this thing through the ceiling now. It's like 99.9% accurate. Every time she comes out with something, it's gosh darn it, it's even more accurate than the last time. And now in the 1977 study, by the way, they falsely arrested almost half of the people that were sober. And they said, well, that's unacceptable. But because this was done in a laboratory, we think that the officers were more willing to commit themselves to an arrest. That won't happen on the road. Now, one of the important things that's in this manual is this page about validation of the field sobriety testing. This says that the test must be administered in the standardized prescribed fashion. The standardized clues must be used to assess the subject's performance, and the standardized criteria must be employed to interpret that performance. If these things are changed, then the validation of these tests is compromised. That has been removed from the 2013 manual altogether. Now, they haven't done any new studies, but now they're taking this away and replacing it with pictures in this new manual, which is actually called a guide. It's not even a manual anymore. It's now a guide. Now, the HGN test, this eye test that I was telling you about, this is the introduction to the voodoo that will later result in DRE. HGN, you've all seen it, and I know that a lot of you are kind of like, well, gosh, I don't know. You can turn to the book and you can walk yourself through the steps one by one as to whether or not your officer's doing it. This is not the HGN test. The HGN test takes a full minute. You need to check to make sure that the eyes track equally. You need to ensure that the subject's pupils are equal in size. One complete pass to check that equal tracking. You then begin to move the stimulus over 2 seconds out and 2 seconds back to center, checking the subject's left eye first to see if there is a lack of smooth pursuit. You then check the other eye. You then repeat that process. You then check for the distinct and sustained nystagmus at maximum deviation by holding the stimulus out as far as the eye will go for a minimum of 4 full seconds. Then you'll check the other eye, 4 full seconds. Then you'll repeat that process. And then you'll check for the onset prior to 45 degrees, moving the stimulus extremely slowly at a rate that takes approximately 4 full seconds to reach the 45-degree mark. If you see nystagmus, you must stop and verify its presence, and then you repeat those steps again. All told, it takes approximately a minute to do the test. Anytime that you see a video where the officer is doing it in 20 seconds, I guarantee that the officer has not done it correctly. And there's People versus Berger. Berger says that it's the incumbent upon the prosecution to establish a proper foundation, that the test was done properly and that the officer was properly trained. This is the proper training, so therefore the officer has to follow these protocols. But statistically, it's not 77% accurate. Marceline Burns came out in a study that was delayed for several years. She's been yelling at the National College for DUI defense members for a long time that we're just a little slimy when it comes to this eye test that she invented. She claims that these defenses that we raised, that the officer had the stimulus too high or that he moved it too fast, those are just nonsense. You can do this thing because it's a very robust test. And this study was delayed several years. And then all of a sudden, boom, out of the blue it came with no fanfare, no announcement, just kind of quietly made its way onto the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's website. And a couple of my friends went through the numbers because they were testing using drug recognition experts and standardized field sobriety training instructors such as Tony Corrado to do these tests on a category of people, some of whom were not intoxicated, some of whom were intoxicated, and saying, you very experienced trained officers, tell us how many clues you find, and then we're going to compromise the test by moving it faster and compare those numbers. Well, when they did it wrong 92% of the time, or 92% of the time they falsely arrested a sober person. When the person was, or when the officers did the test properly, they were able to reduce that false arrest rate to, ready, 77%. So you've got a test that's 77% accurate, according to NHTSA, and yet you will falsely arrest a sober motorist when doing the test properly 77% of the time. HDN serves as a bridge, HDN serves as the introduction to the ARIDE program, which serves as the bridge to the DRE program. ARIDE has been implemented in the state of Michigan now for a few years. Think of ARIDE as DRE Officer Light, okay? ARIDE is taught to many officers. This is more advanced than the standardized field sobriety training course, but less advanced than the drug recognition expert training. And these materials, again, like these manuals, they're all on that OWI defense law page, or at least they will be once the links are actually live. I know that the manuals are there, but there's no links to it yet. The purpose of the course in the ARIDE is to train officers to observe, identify, and articulate the signs of impairment related to drugs or alcohol, or a combination of both. Let's skip through some of this. Pharmacokinetics, if you get into drug driving, pharmacokinetics is a big deal. It's going to be one of these terms you run across. It accounts for how a chemical substance is transported through the body in terms of absorption, distribution, metabolism, and elimination. And this is all straight out of the book, all right? Now, ARIDE claims to have these various medical conditions that they can distinguish from drug effects, okay? Head trauma, stroke, diabetes. Diabetics, incidentally, will frequently exhibit when they're in sugar shock. They'll look like they're drunk, okay? And then they'll blow into a PBT and they blow very low numbers. Acetone will measure positive as if it were alcohol, however, but low numbers. And yet the person appears to be highly intoxicated, and immediately the officer will start to suspect drugs. But diabetics will mimic this. And then in the book it says conjunctivitis. What? That sounds like a fancy word, but what they mean is pink eye. You're going to think that somebody is high or under the influence of narcotics because they have pink eye. Shock, multiple sclerosis, and other conditions. Straight out of the manual, other conditions. Very descriptive. The one thing that the ARIDE program does, though, is it introduces the officers to the 7 different drug categories. This is the foundation that the drug recognition expert program is built upon. Central nervous depressants, alcohol, a lot of your like Xanax, the depressants kind of slow the system down, and then you've got central nervous system stimulants. Amphetamines, cocaine, hallucinogens. These include like your LSD, natural as well as, Ambien's a good example. The 7 drug categories were kind of built around what was commonly used or abused out on the streets. And Ambien is kind of a hypnotic, okay? It shows you how the drug categories don't exactly work. And Ambien driving cases, there's a lot of these Ambien driving cases. You'll have people that take Ambien, go to sleep, and they wake up in jail. They don't even know that they got out of bed. They're sleep eating. There's stories of sleep sex. And worst of all, though, there is sleep driving. And I've had 2 or 3 of these cases in just recent years where the person does not actually mean to be driving, and yet they're out driving. Dissociative anesthetics. This is PCP is your best example, and dextromorphine is another example. That is an over-the-counter cough medicine, and it doesn't normally have the effects of PCP. But if you take the entire bottle, you'll start talking about the Thanksgiving turkey that's in the oven at home when it's July. And narcotic analgesics, these are heroin, morphine, I believe. Yeah, morphine is included in there. And we'll talk about this. Number 5, narcotic analgesics, is important in that it's the only drug out of the 7 that will make the eyes constrict. Only one. Keep that as kind of a rule of thumb in your mind, because you will have all sorts of officers telling you, and the subject's eyes were constricted. And no, they were dilated, weren't they? Well, what's the difference, Mr. Mays? Inhalants, we talked about that with the Livingston County case. And cannabis. Cannabis has to make its own category. Why? Because they couldn't neatly fit it into any one of the other 6. I don't know. But here you go. This is dilated versus constricted. And this is straight out of the ARIDE manual. The eyes are often referred to as the windows to the soul. Yes. There is a fascination with the eyes in this program that is so ridiculous. I'm going to show you some stuff here in just a little bit. Actually, let me do that now. And I apologize, I could not get the videos to work on my laptop. Here we go.
Drugs have an involuntary effect on the eyes that you can't control. The police can spot this, and the penalties are exactly the same as those for drink driving.
Now, obviously, that's British, right? But, really? How long is it going to be before I pick up a case where the officer says, I looked into the passenger side window and could see the girl's eyes were really big in the back? None of those kids were under the influence of anything. What they did was they filmed a TV commercial, and the editors then went back and exploded the eyes up 30% with like Paint Shop Pro or something like that. All right, that's all that it is. And your eyes don't get bigger when you're under the influence of any of these drugs. Now, unfortunately, I've got to restart this silly PowerPoint. Oh, good. Started from... Okay, pupil size. See the difference in the pupil size. Lack of convergence. If you see an officer do a big circle, ooh, so amazing. Why the circle? I have no idea. Because then you go like this, and you move it towards the subject's eyes. Don't touch the nose. You'll tell them, I'm going to get close to your nose, but I won't touch the nose, and I want you to follow it with your eyes. And what you're looking for is to see if the person can cross their eyes. It's silly. It's never even been investigated. Vertical gaze nystagmus. I don't know why this is broken out apart from the HGN, because once we do all these things that I told you about earlier, we're supposed to check for vertical in connection with the standardized field sobriety test, but now it's got to be its own special test off on its own. And the modified Romberg balance test. I'll go back to that in a couple minutes here. I've got the LOC procedures here. I'm going to skip through that. Oh, this is my challenge. Okay? Supposedly, your eyes can actually go in different directions if you're messed up. And this can be caused by alcohol. So tonight when you go on out and you're having a couple cocktails, I want you to get so messed up and have your friends check your eyes when you try to cross them. And I want you to have any one of you, I'll pay you $5 if one of you can get your eye to go the other way. Not with a pre-existing medical condition though, but as a result of the consumption of the alcohol. But again, 25. And green tongue. Is Tom Page here? Tom Page was one of the big drug recognition guys out of California. He's originally from Detroit, and he's a really nice guy. He's written a book, I can't remember who the publisher is, but it's on the effects of drugs and driving. And he did that, co-authored it with Marceline Burns, Southern California Research Institute. He came out as an expert witness in a case that I had a few years ago, and I was like, wow, Tom, what are you doing here in Michigan? He's like, oh, well, I'm originally from here, and I think that I might spend some more time here. And I've seen that he's been used by the prosecutors a couple of times. He privately told me that Michigan was one of the worst states when it came to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's programs. We're finally getting on board, is what he says, finally. But Tom, well, there's this whole thing about green tongue. Green tongue does not appear in any of the drug recognition expert materials whatsoever. But every officer who comes out of there is looking for green tongue. We've actually had people that were stopped by the police, and they don't ask if you've been drinking. They don't ask if you've been smoking. They say, stick out your tongue. What? This does not even appear in the materials. Tom says, well, I don't really place too much emphasis on this green tongue. He says, at most, a green or a color for that matter coating on the tongue means that the person ingested something. That something could have been marijuana, mints, toothpaste, or anything. Certainly if someone is regularly smoking something, the person's tongue may show signs of being irritated. And if someone is smoking a hand-rolled marijuana cigarette, I wouldn't be surprised to discover that some of the marijuana debris had been deposited in the person's mouth. As far as raised taste buds go, the most I would do in court is to testify to my observations that the person's tongue looked to have small bumps on his or her tongue, and that was consistent with people I've seen who I believe are smoking marijuana or crack or meth or something else. There's a response to that on his website or whatever website this is. It's anonymous. I didn't post it. The most ridiculous thing, and it is the most ridiculous thing. First off, I know a couple people who smoke marijuana.
No.
And they roll those doobies up real tight so that they don't lose any of that stuff, right? I smoke Camels. Any tobacco in my mouth? I'm not eating the stuff, right? I'm not dipping my Camels. Anyways, I know. Anyway, all right. There's this caution, and there's all sorts of disclaimers in the ARIDE program. If they teach these officers and pump them all up with all this great drugged information, although effects displayed in the table are what we usually find when observing a subject impaired by various types of drugs, you may not always find them. Not everyone is affected the same way by drugs. What? And further disclaimers. I'll let you read all these later on at your leisure, but this is important. The officer who completes this course is not certified as a DRE and does not have the training required to support the selection of a specific drug category, which may be the source of the subject's impairment. These ARIDE officers are dangerous creatures. They're trying to come into court and they're trying to testify to these things. They are not allowed to testify to these things. They want to have a DRE come in, have them come in. Do not play DRE light and try to pass off your silly nonsense as if you're an expert. You're not. You're not even allowed under your own rules to testify in court about these things. It is simply for probable cause. Which brings up an interesting point. I don't think that I'm opposed to standardized field sobriety tests, or for that matter, any field sobriety tests. Whatever the officer can articulate for probable cause is fair game, but should it be introduced as substantive evidence of guilt? I totally disagree with that, because these things are hokey, they are made up, and they are subject to these counterattacks where we know that the HGN test is now 77% accurate, but it's also 77% inaccurate. Anyway, now we get into the DRE program. Drug Evaluation Classification Program. This was developed in the 70s in the Los Angeles Police Department. They had a large number of drug cases out there. They noticed what initially was called the barb bounce, which is where you move your finger over to the side. Person who's under the influence of barbiturates, their eye would bounce. That's distinct and sustained nystagmus at maximum deviation nowadays. And they thought, hey, can't we just kind of gather all this information up and kind of compare notes and develop a program around it? And you know what? I don't mean to speak too poorly about it. I'm a skeptic, okay? It is a decent program because at least it's systematic and it's objective, but they take it a little too far. The participant who successfully completes all phases of the drug evaluation classification program is known as a drug recognition expert or drug recognition evaluator. Note, then this is my note. This is my note. The term expert is gratuitously self-imposed, much like forensic scientist is given to a recent college graduate who's analyzing blood at the Michigan State Police. Let's skip over that. Oh, this is the drug influence evaluation. It's not much different from a standardized field sobriety training form, if you've seen the forms. Don't allow us, like City of Westland has their own little made-up forms. Don't let that happen. Don't be misled. They're in the book, okay? The standardized forms are in the book. This is the standardized form for the drug recognition experts. You need to take a look at this and compare all these little notes that are not going to make any sense to you, like what's the pulse rate? Who cares what the pulse rate is? Just compare that to the cheat sheet on the drug matrix. And if you're dealing with a drug where the pulse rate should be elevated, but it's actually not elevated, let's say that it's actually a little low. You can cross-examine the DRE on that and say, isn't it true, officer, expert, that actually you're expecting an elevated pulse? And they will admit it. They do take this program very seriously. The first step of the 12-step program, all right? We need to talk about the 12 steps. That's incorporated and built around the 7 drug categories, right? First step is the breath test. If the breath test produces very low numbers or 0, 0, 0, the officer will have the DRE perform an evaluation. In other words, the person has just passed the breath test. Why does that all of a sudden raise suspicion? 2, the DRE interviews the officer, circumstances of the arrest, the subject's behavior, appearance, and driving, and the subject's statements and drugs found in the vehicle. 3, preliminary examination and first pulse. Question the subject regarding their health, food, alcohol, and any drugs that they may have consumed, including prescription drugs. The officer is to observe the subject's attitude, coordination, speech, breath, and their face. They're looking for flushed face and that sort of thing, okay? Then they perform the horizontal gaze nystagmus test. Now keep in mind, the officer that arrested this person has already presumably performed the HGN test out on the road, and now the DRE is performing a second HGN test. Then the DRE takes the subject's pulse for the first of 3 times. 3 times it will take the pulse, and this is to account for nervousness and to be able to compare it at the start versus the end. And at that point, the DRE needs to make a decision. This is where there's a fork in the road. Do I continue the evaluation, or do I call an EMS unit because this person is in dire need of medical attention? If the officer decides that medical attention is not warranted, then it works just like this is CGI script language. Just kind of did that up because it's kind of a little silly, but if the breath test is 0.00, then it's either a medical condition, in which case we need medical treatment, or the person is under the influence of drugs. And now we need to find the evidence to prove it. As a matter of fact, there's an Oregon case. There's a good Oregon case that went through the 12-step process where they did not get blood at the end of the case. Initially, Oregon accepted this drug recognition expert program and said, hey, it sounds good to us, best thing since sliced bread. And then they had an officer come in and try to testify to the 11 steps, not including the blood test. They said, whoa, 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 we didn't mean that. And Oregon said, not without all 12 steps. And they went back later on, and there's a Court of Appeals decision. I don't believe that it's published out of Oregon, but in that case, they said that there is probable cause, or actually, probable cause is even heightened when the person passes the breath test. Oh boy, you can't win any way with these folks. Okay, now we're going to do some more eye tests. Remember, the DRE did the second eye test just a few minutes ago. The officer did one on the road. The DRE just did an HGN test. Mere moments later, he does the HGN test again. And now we're going to do vertical. Again, that's normally part of the HGN test. Then we're going to do lack of ocular convergence. That's the lack of convergence I told you earlier, but now it's referred to as lack of ocular convergence because it sounds fancier. Now the DID is how it's described in the materials. I was taught it as DIP. Depressants, inhalants, and PCP will cause nystagmus. Nystagmus is simply a bouncing in the eyes. Your eyes always have this involuntary jerking. It's just not quite as pronounced because there's all these muscles moving around the eye that make it look like it's moving smoothly, but it's not actually. And when you drink alcohol, it becomes a little bit, this jerking becomes a little bit more pronounced. That will also happen with the inhalants, like the kid out in Livingston County that's huffing, and it will also happen with PCP or other dissociative anesthetics. They describe it as DID. And with marijuana, mental note, make a note of this. Lack of convergence is the only one that you're going to have with marijuana. HGN will be absent. VGN will be absent. Okay? No HGN with, actually there was an Australian study. They tried to come up with this weird head jerk movement. They called it HGM because that also sounds fancy, right? Head jerk movement was when you, I don't know, you jerked your head while they were conducting the eye test. Then we go into divided attention tasks. Romberg. Romberg, and I know that there might be a couple of judges here. Y'all have a lot more experience than I do when it comes to these medical cases. I practice in the district courts where we don't do anything medical. All those big lawsuits go up to circuit. And so the district court judges, who are usually the ones that deal with the majority of these drunk driving cases, they don't have a lot of experience with medical malpractice or doctors and that sort of thing down in the district court level. Romberg is a medical evaluation. It developed back in the 1800s, and it's not conducted anything like what police officers do. The Romberg test that police officers do, down here you can see, this is a medical chart that the old Romberg test was designed, and you can see here there's a doctor doing this to a patient. That's not how it's done by police officers. Police officers want you to stand with your feet together, arms at your sides, and tilt your head back with your eyes closed. They look for eyelid tremors. Your eyelids are going to go like this if you're under the influence of marijuana. Check it out. Yeah. And I guess that I'm assuming that some of you have been exposed to marijuana or people who smoke marijuana. Check out their eyelids. Are they doing this? Ever? You'd be shocked at how many DREs see it, and you don't. Huh. It's also supposed to be a 30-second test. They say, all right, estimate 30 seconds while you stand there. And if a person's under the, well, there are some funny examples to this. Lance Platt is a different DRE. He's also gone private, and he's out there working with the defense community and teaching the SFSTs and whatnot. Lance had a evaluation where he told this young lady, she was all fidgety like this, and he said, all right, do the 30 seconds. I want you to close your eyes and 30 seconds. Okay. And he says, what? I told you to estimate 30 seconds. She's like, okay. And she does it again. Okay. And she's just like that. And Lance says, you thought that was 30 seconds? And she said, well, I knew that I was counting fast, so I did it 3 times. Yeah, there are drugs that'll do that. Oh, you know what? Before we go any further, there's one other video that I want to play for you. This really goes to the heart of this presentation here.
A moment, sir.
This is honesty in action.
Are you okay? Are you okay?
Yeah.
What's the matter with you?
He broke his leg just now.
Do you have any kind of medical problems?
Oh, man.
What have you been taking tonight?
Oh, man. Oh, man. Oh, man.
Sir! Stop that. What are you doing? Sit down before you hurt yourself.
What?
Sit down in the chair before you hurt yourself.
Oh, man.
5:15. I said, get me an ambulance here. 10:18. I got something here. Sit. Jesus. Just stay right there. Don't move. Don't move.
I'm sorry.
I wish I could tell you, Sarge. I don't know. I need an ambulance. 10:18.
He's going to sit down there, and then the officer is going to say, no, I need you to stay down there. I need you to stay down there. don't get up, don't get up. And he keeps trying to get up, and he keeps saying, I'm not trying to get up. And he just doesn't know. And what's going on here? This is sudden loss of muscle control. It's a side effect of GHB. Big dose goes to the brain, shuts down. Another big dose goes to the brain, shuts down. And he actually did break his leg there that first time that he fell out of the car. And he was driving. Isn't that scary? He was driving. Anyway, back to step 6, vital signs and second pulse. At this point, we take blood pressure, temperature, pulse. All of these things have been evaluated in reference to known drugs of abuse that correspond with one of the various 7 categories. Some drug categories might elevate these things, and others might decrease, etc. And number 7, oh boy, more eye tests. Oh boy, more eye tests. I love this. This is going to be the darkroom examination. The DRE is going to estimate the subject's pupil sizes under 3 different light conditions with a measuring device called a pupillometer. This is a pupillometer. Are they dilated? Are they constricted? Are they normal? Some drugs will increase pupil size, dilating them, while others may decrease, constrict pupil size. And then they will see how the timing of the light in the darkroom, you're taking the flashlight, here, I've got a picture of it. Well, there, they're going to take that flashlight, look to see how that pupil changes. Does it do it slowly? Then we will examine muscle tone. This is where it starts to get weird, folks. This is step 8. We're going to check the guy's arms and see if his muscles are all tight or if he's all loose. And then we're going to check for injection sites. But hold on, while we're looking for injection sites, let's go back to step 2. Because I've got a theory here that the vast majority, step 3, the vast majority of drug recognition experts successfully make a prediction based upon this step. You want to know how? Sir, what have you taken tonight? That's all. That's where all this good stuff comes from. Now we're looking for these injection sites, but haven't we just done the tests to check for muscle rigidity? Why are we checking for it now? Wouldn't you have seen it already? What about we're taking the pulse twice already? Number 10, and this is why I backed up to number 2 just a moment ago. We are now going to read the subject Miranda. Oh my God, why are we going to read a Miranda now? We're 45 minutes into this thing. We've already asked him all these questions, and it does note that some police stations will read the Miranda before this. And why can't we do another eye test? Come on, that's cool. All right, the analysis and the opinion. Based upon the totality of the evaluation, the DRE forms an opinion as to whether or not the subject is impaired. If the DRE determines that the subject is impaired, the DRE will indicate what category or categories. Polydrug use. You always go for 2 drugs, because that way you're probably more likely than not going to guess one of them at least, especially if the guy's admitted to one of them. Let's see. Oh, then we do the blood and the urine. I didn't have enough time to talk about blood and urine because it's a whole nother thing. Essentially, though, urine just tells you what the person may have done in the last couple of days. Urine should never be allowed into evidence, and the state lab actually agrees with this, Michigan State Police. If you get a toxicologist down from there, they will say, no, urine only tells you metabolites and whatnot else. But here in the very materials that they're training these DREs, they give us all sorts of assurances that, hey, this isn't scientific, this isn't novel, this is just clinical signs and symptoms. Nothing to see here, folks. The court responses to the drug recognition experts, I've kind of covered this, but in those 3 opinions, you can read them that are on the CAP seminar page. There have been successful Daubert decisions. Maryland consolidated cases, that's the most recent. It's huge, okay? There were a lot of experts. National College for DUI Defense, I believe, was intimately involved in that decision. And then you take a look at Williams. In the Florida case, that was one of the original ones. They lumped all the eye tests together and called it HGN. No court has ever accepted a lack of convergence or VGN except for Williams, which called it HGN. Now, how reliable is the DRE 12-step process? And I'll wrap this up pretty quick here. The methodological quality of the 3 foundational law enforcement drug influence evaluation validation studies by Greg Kane. This came out only last month. This is not even a final version of it. This is still a pre-publication version that I was able to get a hold of. And it establishes that there's no validity to these things whatsoever. And he makes the observation in this paper that it seems to us that normally you've either got an admission from the person, that's how they tell, or the mere fact that a person has blown all zeros in and of itself is enough for them to try and claim that this person is under the influence of something. And if they come up with the wrong drug, well, they just say, hey, that's how it works. It's a good paper, and once it does finally come out, full publicized version, it's going to have some ramifications on this program. This is from his paper here. It's just like my little computer program, you know, where we say, hey, if this, then that, else this. With the Daubert challenges, I'm just kind of poking fun at some of the judges that I run across. You keep saying weight versus admissibility. I do not think it means what you think it means. It's going to be hard to win these cases. A lot of judges are going to say that it goes to weight. The alphabet goes to weight. The counting backwards goes to weight. Yeah, it does go to weight, but should jurors consider this stuff if it's really wildly unreliable? I mean, what if we can go on in and prove that the HGN test, for example, is 77% inaccurate? I mean, Daubert requires much more than that. Not just a good guess or a hunch or something like that. It requires more, especially to be used as substantive evidence of a person's guilt. And again, these DREs are attempting to come into courtrooms with no blood, to get a conviction based upon their clinical signs and symptoms that they see. I did do a trial recently out in Ann Arbor, and in that case, I didn't really have a really strong defense. I just let the DRE just talk himself silly. And the jurors were sitting over there, they were all nodding off asleep, and I just kept my mouth shut because I knew that he wasn't getting any credibility. It takes a long time to go through all of these steps. And, rolling logs. I've got a bunch of these. I did not incorporate them into this presentation, but we have a Southfield officer as a DRE, and I've had the opportunity to cross-examine him on just a general drunk driving case when, lo and behold, midway through the trial, he admitted on cross-examination that he was a DRE, and I was shocked because he couldn't even do the HGN test correctly. And I pulled his rolling logs. He was brought in by an officer to rule out alcohol. And he successfully ruled out alcohol, and they shipped blood on off to Michigan State Police for analysis, and the blood came back 0.17. You ruled it out at a 0.17? Oh my God. Anyway, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell if somebody's a 0.17. Message though, jurors don't like drug driving. If you're smoking marijuana, even if it's medical marijuana, they're suspicious. This is how they see your clients. And the other scary thing are these numbers that come back from toxicology. Aaron Berea is got a case right now where the result is 11 nanograms per milliliter of amphetamine. What does that mean? What does it mean? The prosecutors in that case wanted a conviction based upon 11 nanograms. Well, 11 nanograms is about 1/3 of a normal dose, and Michigan State Police will come on in and say, well, that's pretty low. If you add a 0 to that, it becomes significant. Now, of course, 11 nanograms for marijuana, now we're starting to talk about something that might be significant. Might, emphasis on might. But it all depends on the substance, and this is where we get involved with our PDRs and our basalt disposition of toxic drugs in man. You also need to be able to overcome snap decisions. This is a section that I actually deleted from this presentation because it was so long. Snap decisions are described by Dr. Sun Wolf. If you haven't heard of Sun Wolf, go back, look her up on the internet. She is a jury consultant, she's a lawyer, and she is a remarkable presenter on jury thinking. Dynamic Jury Thinking is one of her books, and she's just got some really nifty stuff out there on how to communicate effectively with jurors, how jurors are thinking. One of the things that she covers is snap decisions. I think maybe this was covered on her Twitter page actually. It might not be in the books, but it's based upon a book called Blink, where we make these snap decisions. You know, you walk into a courtroom and the judge wants to know, what do you think of this person right now? Does he look guilty? Hey, they might not say yes, but some people, you know, you got the guy with the red face and the big nose, and he's accused of drinking too much and driving, he's got a couple strikes against him in the minds of those jurors when they look at him because they make that type of snap decision. Same thing happens with marijuana. They see a young kid who doesn't appear to need medical marijuana, had this case, and they want to convict him because they don't think that he should be using medical marijuana. And this is the end of my presentation. Feel free to call me at any time, 734-591-0100. Jump on Facebook. You can follow my rants on May's Legal Group. And last but not least, this is Tao, my puppy, who coincidentally, it is his birthday today. He turned 1. Thank you all very much.